Early on, when I was working in a hospital setting, supporting patients with life-limiting illness, there were days when the emotional weight was so heavy that I questioned if I had the capacity to keep doing this work. But it was through supervision sessions that I learned that, showing up consistently, even when you don't have all the answers, can be the most powerful form of presence. I realized that it's not about fixing everything. We're not superheroes, but it's about being a steady hand when someone's world feels like it's falling apart.
Hello and welcome to Moments in Mind, a podcast from Pearson Clinical Assessment. My name's Andy McLean. I'm a podcast producer based in Australia, and in this series we share extraordinary stories of professionals who make a difference in people's mental well-being every single day. In each episode, a special guest reveals moments that have changed their life and changed the lives of the people who they support. In today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Adrian Toh, a man I'd describe as quietly heroic, and certainly a man of many talents. Adrian is a clinical psychologist at the Other Clinic in Singapore. He's also an Adjunct Senior Lecturer at the National University of Singapore, and he's the president of the Singapore Psychological Society. So he's got a lot of fingers in a lot of pies. And with a CV like that, you probably already guessed that this is a very wide-ranging conversation. Since 2008, Adrian has worked in a variety of settings, from hospital to prison to education to the Institute of Mental Health. You name it, he's probably worked there at some point. So in our discussion, he shares some of the highs and lows of his work with clients and also reflects on changing cultural attitudes towards mental health in Singapore. So without further ado, let's jump in and hear the conversation. Hello, Adrian. Welcome to Moments in Mind.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me here today.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you on the show, Adrian. Before we delve into your career highlights, I'd like to start by going back to your childhood. Can you tell me what your earliest memory is?
My earliest memory of childhood is buying my first goldfish from the market with my aunt. I was probably about 4 or 5 years old then, and I can remember that I was standing in front of the plastic tubs, mesmerized by the orange fish. And at that moment, I remember I had to choose one that felt special. It felt like I had to choose a friend, to pick a friend. And as psychologist, I can see why this memory stuck so clearly. This memory is so tied to agency, where I had to make a choice about which fish I want, the attachment to the fish, as well as the responsibility that's attached to that as well at such young age, to change the water, to feed it regularly. I felt the joy and excitement in caring for this fish. And of course, with that, it came the sadness when the fish died a few days after.
Oh gosh, as a small child, you would have had so many experiences packed into a really short space of time there, wouldn't you? You'd have been experiencing responsibility, joy, ownership.
Yeah, and that was probably my first experience of loss as well. Yeah, and well, the goldfish that didn't live long, but that memory stayed with me for a long time.
Yeah, well, no wonder it left a lasting impression on you then. Let's move along the Adrian Toh timeline and talk about what led you to psychology. As a young man, I believe you were tempted to follow many of your friends into a career in business or accountancy. So what tipped the scales in favour of psychology?
I personally did not know anyone studying psychology, let alone knowing a psychologist. Yeah, so it was a very unfamiliar territory. Yeah, so I actually had to pause and reflect, not just about what I could do, but also about who I wanted to serve, what kind of impact I hope to make, as well as what brought me joy. And I thought back about my times in school, especially when I was in leadership role in uniform groups, as well as my time volunteering in the local hospice, where I found deep fulfillment in looking after others, advocating for their welfare. and supporting peers through challenging times. And those moments make me smile. And I realized that, working with people, listening to their concerns, helping them to grow were things that gave me purpose. It wasn't a grand epiphany, but, it was a quiet, honest moment of clarity with, what mattered to me.
Oh, that's lovely. A quiet, honest moment of clarity. I love that description. Let's move along the timeline again. You've been working in psychology since 2008 in a really wide range of settings. I'm fascinated by this. You've worked with patients at Tan Tock Seng Hospital and children with special needs. You've interned at the Institute of Mental Health. You've been involved with the Singapore Prison Service. This is to name just a few of the earlier parts of your career. And we'll get to some of the later ones in a moment. But before we do, I just wondered if you could reflect, like over the past couple of decades, what changes have you witnessed in social attitudes towards mental health in Singapore?
And certainly, for sure, there has been significant shift in cultural attitudes towards mental health in Singapore over the last 2 decades. And as I mentioned earlier, when I first started out, psychology wasn't a common field of study. So no one I knew was pursuing it, and the public had little understanding of what psychologists actually did. And back then, if someone said that they were seeing a psychologist, it was often assumed that, something was seriously wrong. Yeah, and even in the early 2010s, I remembered receiving referrals from doctors for issues such as chronic pain or weight management, and patients as well as their families would sometimes respond with confusion. They would ask questions like, and does the doctor think that I have a mental illness or something? Yeah, and some wouldn't even turn up for the appointment because they didn't see the relevance. And fast forward to today, and much have changed. The COVID-19 actually played a major role in raising this awareness of mental health and mental well-being. More people now understand that mental health is not just about disorders. It's about stress, it's about relationship, it's about resilience and the daily functioning. But there's a growing openness to caring for mental well-being. And seeking help is no longer seen as a weakness. Rather, it's increasingly recognized as a strength. And since 2020, this is COVID season, we have seen an increase in demand for psychological services in Singapore, where people are more willing to seek support, and they are doing so earlier, which is a very encouraging sign of progress.
Well, thinking back to the early part of your career, could you tell me about a breakthrough moment that you experienced with a client and perhaps something that you learned from them?
Mm. Well, one client who stayed in my memory over the years was a woman in her late 30s. She was referred for chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and she had been living with this widespread pain for years. And by the time we met, she was really exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. She had seen so many specialists, tried different kind of medication, but nothing seemed to work for her. And when she's referred to psychology, she told me in the first session, I don't see how talking is going to help me with my pain. And of course, I can see why she's skeptical and even a little offended as well. But then as we began working together, we started shifting the focus from getting rid of the pain to living with it differently. And so we kind of explored the stress cycle, being catastrophizing, the way childhood experience of being unheard for her may have actually shaped her pain narrative, and how the isolation was actually amplifying her suffering. Now, one of the breakthrough moments came not in a dramatic session, but actually quite quietly when she shared that she had started walking to a nearby pub each morning for just 10 minutes. And she said, the pain is still there, but for those 10 minutes, I felt like I'm not just my pain. And that small shift from identifying the pain to reclaiming that agency, it was powerful. She began reconnecting with friends. She started using mindfulness to respond rather than to react to the pain flares. And eventually, she returned to part time work. So, what made it memorable for me, it wasn't just her progress, but how it reshaped my own understanding of healing. That it's not always about cure, but restoring dignity, choices, as well as meaning. So I still think of her when I work with clients who feel stuck in cycles of suffering. Because sometimes the most powerful therapeutic work lies in helping someone see that even in pain, even in struggles, even in suffering, they can still move forward.
Yes, well, I've experienced chronic pain for 20 years actually, and I've heard it described a bit like this. Pain is an inevitable part of being human. There's only so much we can do to alleviate the physical pain, but we can choose our response to the pain.
That's right.
Okay, Adrian, well, let's take a short break now. In the second half of the podcast, I'm keen to talk about your work in education and maintaining high standards in psychology in Singapore. I'd also like to talk about empathy and compassion, and we'll discuss one of the hardest moments in your career so far as well. We'll be back just in a moment.
For more than 100 years, Pearson Clinical Assessment has tested and refined products and services that give educators and clinicians trusted tools to make a profound difference in the lives of adults and children. To find out more about the tools that Adrian and his colleagues use at the other clinic, such as the Weschler Memory Scale and the Beck Depression Inventory, just Google Pearson Clinical Assessment and check out the Pearson website.
Welcome back to the podcast. So, Adrian, let's talk about another moment in your career. You've worked with people during some of the most challenging times of their lives when they've been feeling really vulnerable and having some very difficult experiences. I'm interested in what some of the toughest moments have been for you professionally.
Early on, when I was working in a hospital setting, supporting patients with life limiting illness, there were days when the emotional weight was so heavy that I questioned if I had the capacity to keep doing this work. But it was through supervision sessions that I learned that, showing up consistently, even when you don't have all the answers, can be the most powerful form of presence. I realized that it's not about fixing everything. We're not superheroes, but it's about being a steady hand when someone's world feels like it's falling apart. And that shifted something in me. And I carry that lesson with me every day.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? How during the hardest moments of our lives, we actually learn a great deal. You obviously now work with a lot of younger psychologists, and they will have their own struggles, of course. What advice do you have for them?
I like to highlight that, you are not alone. You have a supervisor, you have a team, and we can always turn to them. But I think as starting out as a psychologist, we think that we can do a lot. We think that we're here to change the world. We think that we're superheroes. Those are not exactly true. I like to think that we can just do our best, and that's the best that we can do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you're very modest, Adrian. I personally think that psychologists are quite heroic, although I do take your point, you're human just like the rest of us. Now, let's move a little bit further along the timeline of your career. And in fact, let's talk about present day. So, you've been involved with the National University of Singapore for a few years now, and today you're an Adjunct Senior Lecturer there. Tell me, why are you so passionate about education?
Well, education has always been close to my heart, not just as a way of shaping or sharing knowledge, but as a way of shaping the future of psychology in Singapore. And since 2021, I had this privilege of serving as Adjunct Senior Lecturer at the National University of Singapore. And every time I teach, I'm reminded of the impact that my own lecturers had on me. So I was very fortunate to learn from practicing psychologists, professionals who brought the real world experience into the classroom, their stories, their insights, understanding of how psychology is applied within the Singapore uniquely diverse cultural landscape. But it kind of showed me what it meant to practice psychology with care, with cultural sensitivity, as well as the integrity. So now I try to do the same for my students. And what I enjoy most is seeing their curiosity, see how it grows, watching them connect theory to practice, challenging some of the assumptions, and begin to find their own voice. So I see education as legacy building. And even if I journey with a student for just a short while, a semester long, I hope that they can carry forward this value, this thinking, as well as compassion that we explore together into their future practice. And in this way, education isn't about maintaining high standards, it's about cultivating a thoughtful, ethical, and culturally responsive generation of psychologists who will shape the landscape long after we're gone.
Ah, isn't that interesting? So you're kind of talking there about two very different sides to psychology. First, there's the clinical rigor and standards, which are obviously very important. And second is the cultural sensitivity and compassion, if you like. And that's interesting because as a clinical psychologist at the other clinic, you're encountering different clients all day, every day, right? How do you ensure that you retain empathy and compassion for every individual that you spend time with?
I think as psychologists, we spend a lot of time thinking about our client, attending to their needs, and therapy session doesn't end when the hour is up. But after the hour that we spend with our clients, we make deliberate effort to reflect. How was the session? How's my client? What does he or she need in our next session together? And all this will be included into my case notes. And when I close my window, when I'm done with my case notes, I will be very intentional to shut down that window and not have it lingering at the back of my mind because it would be very unfair to the next client that I'm seeing. It would be very unfair to my family when I return home as well. So when I close that window, I close that window. And the next time I open it, I have everything that I need right there in front of me to work with this particular client.
Oh, that's beautifully put, Adrian. I love that. Could you maybe share a memorable moment that you've shared with a client at the other clinic?
One particular memorable case that I worked with involved a young Singaporean man in his mid 20s who was struggling with harm related OCD. It's a lesser known but deeply distressing form of OCD. So his intrusive thoughts revolve around a fear of unintentionally harming others or himself. And these were not thoughts that he wanted or believed in, but they caused a lot of intense distress and shame for him. And then by the time that he came to see me, he actually stopped using sharp objects altogether. So he would avoid holding knives, scissors, or even pens with pointed tips. And at home, he would insist on eating with his hands because using forks or butter knife felt too dangerous for him. And what made his experience more isolating was that from the outside, he looked fine. OCD isn't always visible. And so friends and families didn't really fully understand his fears. And he himself was also afraid to talk about these intrusive thoughts. He was worried that people might misinterpret them as violence or dangerous. At its core, the harm OCD is driven by a fear of losing control, not a desire to cause harm. And that distinction was key in helping him to feel safe enough to open up in sessions with me.
So tell me, Adrian, what type of intervention did you introduce for that client?
So we worked together using exposure and response prevention, ERP, which slowly reintroducing situation that would trigger his anxiety, starting with holding a spoon and then holding a fork, and then eventually preparing simple meal using a butter knife. Each step was small, but it was very intentional, it was very deliberate. And he learned through this experience that thoughts are not intentions. And with patience and support along this way, that anxiety eventually loses grip. One day he shared that he actually sat down for a family dinner. He cut his food with a regular knife and enjoyed the meal without the usual panic. It was a quiet, everyday moment, But for him, it actually marked a return to something really precious. And that's the ability to live without the distress. And that's what makes this work so meaningful. That we are not just reducing the symptoms, but we are helping someone to rejoin his life.
Yeah, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Helping people to live happier, more fulfilled lives. Let's stay at the other clinic for a moment longer. How do standardized assessments contribute to your work there?
Standardized assessment, they actually play a key and important role in my work. They help to bring structure, objectivity, as well as a shared language to what can often be complex emotional experience. Well, among the tools, I frequently use the back depression inventory too, and the back anxiety inventory. These tools are useful, especially in the initial stage of therapy. So, for example, I once worked with a young adult client who came in reporting feeling tired, feeling off, and through the conversation, he was hesitant to use terms like depression or feeling anxiety. And then administering the BDI2 and BAI actually gave us a clearer picture. So he scored in a moderate to severe range for both depression and anxiety. And that was a turning point. Seeing the result actually helped him to give a name to what he was going through. It also guided us through our treatment goals as well. And in another case, I used the BDI2 with a client experiencing chronic pain. This tool helped us to track, how her mood fluctuates in response to the pain management strategies and the life stresses. And over time, her score gradually dipped, and we were able to reflect together on her progress. Not just anecdotally or subjectively, I felt better, but it's through a measurable change. Now, these assessments are not just about laboring. They are about providing us clarity and validating the client's experience, helping us as clinicians to actually tailor our intervention with greater precision.
Having that evidence based approach really makes a difference, doesn't it? Which actually brings me to your work as president of Singapore Psychological Society. How do standardized assessments contribute to maintaining high standards in the practice of psychology in Singapore?
Hmm. So, as the president of the Singapore Psychological Society, one of our core mission is actually to uphold high standards in psychological practice. And a key part of that is ensuring that the tools, the techniques that we use are evidence-based, they are culturally appropriate, and they're ethically sound. So standardized tools like those developed by Pearson play an important role in this. Tools such as the BDI2, the BAI that we spoke about earlier, not only give us a structured and reliable way to assess emotional states like depression and anxiety, but they also help ensure that our clinical decisions are grounded in data, not just intuition, such as how the psychologist view or what the psychologist suspects, but grounded in data. And also, clients are more assured that they know that what the psychologists do is not arbitrary, but anchored in science. Especially in recent years, as public awareness of mental health has grown, there is a stronger call for professionalism and accountability in how we practice. And ultimately, evidence based assessment contribute to clinical excellence, client safety, and the credibility of our profession. As a society, we believe that when psychologists are equipped with the right tools, they can make better decisions. And most importantly, better serve those that come to us for help.
And as president of Singapore Psychological Society, you're kind of seeing the bigger picture, aren't you? You're in a position of influence, you're representing collectively the views of your many members. So I just wondered if you could change one thing about mental health in Singapore more broadly, what would that be?
Well, it would be to ensure that only qualified, regulated professionals are allowed to practice to provide psychological services. So in healthcare, we often speak about the iron triangle, which includes the access to care, cost of care, and quality of care. Now, these three elements are interdependent. Improving one often affects the other. While Singapore has made good strides in improving access to mental health services and managing costs through public subsidies and community based efforts, the quality of psychological services still needs to be strengthened. And that's where regulation comes in. The Singapore Psychological Society is actively working to change this. We are engaging the Ministry of Health, contributing to professional consultation group, and advocating for licensing framework that ensures that psychologists meet the recognized standard of education, ethics, as well as supervision. And by focusing on quality, we are not only protecting the public, we are also helping to ensure that psychological services in Singapore are safe, evidence based, and sustainable as demands continue to grow. And in the long run, and this will strengthen the whole system. When people know that they can trust the care that they receive, they are more likely to seek help early, and outcome improve for everyone.
Well, you're certainly playing your part in helping to build the credibility and the standards of the profession in Singapore, Adrian, and I congratulate you for that. We're running out of time for this episode, but before we go, I'd like to ask you one final question. You've held so many different positions in so many fields during your career. Years from now, when you look back, what do you think will be the moments that you'll remember the most?
I think many years from now, when I look at my career, I don't think I'll remember the titles that I held or the policies that I helped shape as much as I'll remember this deeply human moment when someone actually looked up from a place of pain and said, "Thank you for listening." Or when a client who once couldn't see a future began to believe in one again. And of course, I'll remember the privilege of teaching, watching students find their voice, find their passion for the field, and knowing that psychology in Singapore will be in good hands. And these are these moments that I'll carry with me.
Well, Adrian, that word, quiet, kept popping up in our conversation today. So may I say thank you. You're such a thoughtful and quiet hero. I'm full of admiration for the work that you do. I've really enjoyed our chat today.
Thanks for having me here today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Moments in Mind, a podcast by Pearson Clinical Assessment. To find out more about the tools that Adrian and his colleagues use at the other clinic, such as the Wechsler Memory Scale and the Beck Depression Inventory, just Google Pearson Clinical Assessment and check out the Pearson website. To find out more about the other clinic, visit theotherclinic.sg. And finally, to listen to more episodes of Moments in Mind and to subscribe, you'll find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, pretty much wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, feel free to leave us a rating or a review. In the meantime, thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.
Client details and narratives presented in this podcast have been altered or omitted to protect confidentiality and privacy. Any similarities to actual individuals, events, or circumstances are entirely coincidental. Each client interaction is unique, and the outcomes or breakthroughs described are specific to the individuals involved. These examples are provided for illustrative purposes only and should not be interpreted as guarantees or promises of similar results for others.